Before cities and empires, we were wanderers on this pale blue dot. Our journey began in flickering firelight, painting stories on cave walls. As tools evolved from stone to bronze, so did we. Now, gaze upon the wonders of ancient civilizations. Pyramids, ziggurats, great walls. This is humanity's greatest journey, written in the stars and etched in stone. "70,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. On the surface, the world looked much as it had for hundreds of millennia. Herds of antelope grazed the plains, lions prowled the tall grasses, and small bands of Homo sapiens roamed the land, much like their cousins, Homo neanderthalensis in Europe and Homo erectus in Asia. But within the minds of these African nomads, something had begun to stir. A revolution, quiet, invisible, and yet destined to reshape the course of history. It was not a change in muscle or bone, but in thought. A leap not in strength, but in imagination. Anthropologists call it the cognitive revolution, a turning point when the human brain, already large and capable, began to process the world in entirely new ways. The key to this leap? Language, not just grunts and gestures, but complex, flexible language capable of expressing not only what is, but what might be. The ability to speak of the future, to imagine the past, to warn of danger never seen, or tell tales that were never true, and with it, the birth of fiction. Until now, communication among animals had served practical needs. Food over there, danger near the river. But early humans began to speak of things no eye had seen. The spirits of the mountain, the ancestors who watch from the stars, the rules we must follow, lest the forest spirits grow angry. These were not lies. They were shared beliefs, fictions that bound people together. And they allowed Homo sapiens to do something no other creature had achieved. To cooperate in large numbers, not through force or dominance, but through shared stories. It is no coincidence that around this time we find the first signs of organized hunting of complex rituals and the earliest traces of spiritual life, because behind each of these advances was a mental revolution. Biologically, humans had not changed. But cognitively they had become something else entirely. Some scientists believe this shift was triggered by small mutations in the brain's structure. Others suggest it emerged from social complexity, new pressures that demanded new ways to think. Whatever the cause, the result was profound. Perhaps most surprisingly, one of the greatest engines of this revolution was gossip. Yes, gossip. The idle sharing of news, speculation and scandal. It may sound trivial, but gossip allowed people to keep track of complex social relationships. Who could be trusted? Who had broken a taboo? Who was the bravest hunter? Or the most cunning thief? It was in effect the world's first social network. Through language, humans could maintain relationships not just with a handful of individuals, but with dozens, even hundreds. And as trust grew, so did cooperation. Bands of hunter-gatherers became more than survival units. They became communities with shared rituals, shared values, and shared myths. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, can form tight-knit groups of about 20 to 50 individuals. But humans, armed with language and imagination, could surpass this limit. Through stories, they created imagined communities, united not by blood, but by belief. They began to paint, not for food, not for shelter, but for meaning. On the dark walls of caves, They etched bison and mammoths, handprints and symbols. Messages meant not for survival, but for memory. Perhaps they believed these paintings would speak to spirits or to ancestors, or perhaps to the unborn. And for the first time, the dead were buried with care. With tools, with beads, with red ochre, the colour of blood. These were not merely bodies, they were lives remembered, souls perhaps guided to another world. And so, alongside imagination, belief was born. From imagination came myth, from myth came community, and from community came civilization. The cognitive revolution was not a single event nor the work of one generation. It unfolded over millennia, quietly, gradually. But once ignited, it changed everything. Today we still live in the echo of that ancient spark. Every story we tell, every symbol we believe in, every shared dream, from nations and gods to brands and money, is part of that same lineage. The power to imagine is the power to build, not just tools, but worlds. The first great leap of humanity was not a step into a new land, but into a new way of seeing. And from that vision, everything else would follow. Before temples, before priests, before even the idea of a god with a name, there was the forest. Towering trees, whispering winds, the flash of a predator's eyes in the dark. To early humans, nature wasn't just a backdrop, it was alive. Every rustling leaf, every rolling cloud, every thunderclap was a sign. A presence. And so, deep within the minds of our ancestors, the world began to speak. This was the dawn of animism, the belief that every part of nature possesses a soul. Imagine a world where rocks remember. Imagine a world where rocks remember, where rivers listen, where the moon watches your every move. This is not a metaphor. For thousands of generations, our ancestors truly believed it. In their eyes, the world was filled not with things, but with beings. The tree was not just timber, it was an elder. The wolf was not just a hunter, it was a cousin. The storm was not weather, it was a spirit, angry or kind. With no science to explain the stars or the seasons, early humans turned to the one tool they had mastered: imagination. This was animism in its purest form, a world where everything has meaning, a world where spirit and matter are one. From the African savannas to the Arctic tundra, from island jungles to mountain caves, animism arose independently in nearly every human culture. Not because people were simple, but because the world was mysterious and terrifying and beautiful. And the best way to survive in it was to build a relationship with it. But belief wasn't just personal, it was communal. Around the fire, rituals were born, masks were carved, animals were imitated, spirits were invoked. And in these gatherings, another idea emerged, one that would shape human identity for millennia. And in these gatherings, another idea emerged, one that would shape human identity for millennia: totemism. Totemism is the belief that each human group, each clan, tribe or lineage, is spiritually linked to a particular animal or natural force. You are born not just to a mother, but to a totem. Perhaps your people are of the bear, or the eagle, or the turtle. And with that comes responsibility. To honor, protect and be guided by that being. Totems weren't just symbols. Totems weren't just symbols, they were ancestors, protectors, teachers. They helped define who you were, who you could marry, what your role in the tribe might be. Totemism created social rules, moral codes, and spiritual obligations. Totemism created social rules, moral codes, and spiritual obligations. In a world without written laws, totems were law. From an early age, children learned their totems' myths. They were told the stories of how the eagle taught their people to see far, how the snake brought wisdom, how the deer showed the way of peace. These stories were not merely entertainment, they were identity. Shamans, spirit guides, emerged in nearly all animist cultures. Shamans, spirit guides, emerged in nearly all animist cultures. Men and women who claimed to hear the voices of the wind, who could journey between the physical and spirit realms, who mediated between humans and the forces they could not see. Through trance, drum and dream, the shaman became a living bridge between two worlds, and we see their legacy in the art. Across Europe, Asia, Africa, the Americas, deep in caves and carved into stone, we find animals painted not for food, but for reverence. Bison with halos, birds in sacred patterns, wolves dancing among stars. They are not depictions. They are devotions. To the modern eye, it may seem primitive. But in truth, animism and totemism offered something we still long for today: belonging, connection, meaning. They taught humans to see the world as alive, aware and responsive, to act with respect, to feel watched and guided. And though the modern world has paved over the sacred groves, and drowned the whispers of spirits in the hum of machines, still, something ancient stirs within us. The sense that a place can be holy, that a river might hold memory, that a mountain has a soul. This was the first religion. Not of commandments or cathedrals, but of wonder. A faith born not from power, but from awe. The gods of the forest may have no names. But their echoes remain in myth, in ritual, and perhaps in us. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before written words or kingdoms, humans began to leave messages on the stone walls of the earth itself. These messages weren't sentences, they weren't instructions, they were symbols of meaning, memory and mystery. They were art, and they may be our earliest glimpses into the human soul. This, just a handprint pressed in red ochre, simple, childlike, yet within it lies something profound. I was here, a claim of presence, of self, of spirit. Some were placed high on the ceiling, reachable only by climbing. Others were stenciled in clusters, perhaps by entire families or tribes. It is as if they were saying, we are part of this place, and this place is part of us. But the hand was only the beginning. Soon followed animals, bison, deer, horses, rendered with stunning grace and motion, painted not merely to document but to evoke, to honor, perhaps even to summon. In the famous Chauvet cave in France, dating back over 30,000 years, we find images that still shimmer with vitality. They weren't decorating caves, they were transforming them into sacred spaces, into portals to other worlds. And while some painted, others began to bury, not discard, not hide, but bury with intention and reverence. We find the earliest graves not as random pits, but as places of care, bodies arranged gently, sprinkled with ochre, the colour of blood of life, beads made of shell, tools carefully placed. In some cases, the deceased was a child, still honoured with gifts. Why? Because something had shifted. Death was no longer an end, it was a threshold. From Europe to Africa to the ancient Levant, humans began to treat the dead not as discarded flesh, but as something more, something perhaps eternal. These weren't just rituals, they were reflections of belief, that a part of us endures, that memory matters, that there is more to life than life. And as beliefs deepened, rituals grew. In firelight, humans danced, sometimes alone, sometimes in circles. They drummed, chanted, marked their bodies with pigment. Why? To enter trance, to commune with spirits, to bind the tribe with shared experience. Rituals were not distractions from survival. They were part of survival, psychologically, socially, spiritually. Soon, symbols took on new forms, not just painted, but carved, worn, traded. A bone etched with lines may have marked the moon's cycles. A spiral may have spoken of journeys into the earth or the mind. Dots and grids, perhaps a language of dreams. Even without writing, humans were already thinking in symbols. And those symbols gave shape to the invisible. Some of these artifacts have traveled tens of thousands of years and still speak to us, because the feelings behind them, loss, awe, fear, hope, are not ancient. They are human. And in that recognition, across time, we are connected. Art was not a luxury, it was not culture, it was survival of meaning. The hunter sharpened his spear, the healer crushed her herbs, and the dreamer, the painter, the dancer, the shaman, kept the tribe's spirit whole. Perhaps the ceiling of a cave was their first cathedral, the flickering torchlight, an echo of the stars, the heartbeat of the drum, mirroring the earth's own rhythm. Long before we wrote books or built temples, we made meaning here, in shadow and in silence, in pigment and in gesture, in the language of the soul. And though we live in cities now, surrounded by steel and silicon, we still paint, still bury, still believe, because that ancient impulse to make sense of the great unknown, to grieve, to imagine, to remember, that never left us. It began with a hand on the wall, and it continues whenever we dare to reach beyond the veil. Long before cities, before kings, before machines and money, we were gatherers, we were hunters, we were, above all, social animals. This is the story not of stone tools or fire, but of the brain and how it built the first human communities. For most of our existence, over 90% of human history, we lived in groups of between 20 and 50 people, sometimes more, rarely less. These weren't just bands of individuals, they were families. Shared purpose, shared labor, shared risk. And what made them work wasn't muscle, it was mind. It starts with learning. In the wild, survival depends not just on instinct, but on observation, imitation, and teaching. Children watched their elders. They copied. They learned how to dig for roots, when to set traps, what plants could heal, and which could kill. Human knowledge was not written, but lived, passed mouth to mouth, hand to hand. In early human societies, roles were often flexible. While men may have hunted more frequently, women gathered the majority of the daily calories: roots, berries, nuts, insects. Both sexes participated in tool-making, firekeeping, storytelling, and even healing. There was no factory, no supermarket, just the forest, the plains, and each other. But beyond food and shelter, hunter-gatherers developed something even more vital: trust. When survival depends on cooperation, knowing who you can rely on is everything. And so humans evolved extraordinary social skills: to read faces, interpret tone, remember favors and betrayals. This is what anthropologists call the social brain. Our brains are wired not just to calculate or hunt, but to connect, to track dozens, sometimes hundreds of social relationships, to feel shame, pride, jealousy, compassion, to belong. Because for early humans, being cast out wasn't just sad, it was deadly. Over time, networks expanded. Groups met and mingled at rivers, migration routes, and sacred places. They traded tools, pigments, stories, even marriage partners. This wasn't globalization, but it was the beginning of something vast, a web of human culture spreading knowledge across tribes and generations. A single human is fragile, a human group is formidable. Working together, we could bring down mammoths, cross vast deserts, survive brutal winters. We could share food, ensuring the sick, the young, and the old still had strength. It wasn't competition that built us, it was cooperation. Daily life wasn't always dramatic. In fact, for many groups, it was deeply rhythmic and surprisingly egalitarian. Without kings, landlords, or police, Decisions were made by consensus. Elders were respected, not feared. Leaders, when they existed, led by example, not force. It wasn't a utopia, but it was a world where status came from contribution, not conquest. Around the fire, stories were shared, not just about the past, but about how to live. What was fair, what was sacred, what was forbidden. There were no written laws, yet morality thrived. Because humans don't just pass on genes, we pass on values. Life was in constant motion. Hunter-gatherers moved with the seasons, the herds, the rains. Their home was not a building, but the land itself. And yet, wherever they went, they carried something invisible. A mental map of kinship, a memory of songs, a sense of the sacred. They were mobile, but never rootless. Today, a few hunter-gatherer societies still endure. The San of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Inuit of the Arctic, the Yanomami of the Amazon. Their lives are different, but echo with the same rhythms, of sharing, of observation, of belonging. In them we see not relics, but reminders. For most of our journey as a species, this was home, not the city, not the throne, but the campfire. It was here that language blossomed, that morality formed, that the we was born from the I. The hunter-gatherers may have left few monuments, but they built something far greater, the foundation of humanity itself. It begins with a story, not a fact, not a map, not even a memory, but something imagined. A tale of a spirit in the forest, of a tribe descended from the stars, of a law handed down by the gods. In the beginning we believed, and through belief we began to build something bigger than ourselves. We call it fiction, but to early humans these stories were not entertainment. They were structure. They were truth, of a different kind. They told us where we came from, why we must obey, who belonged and who did not. These shared fictions, whether about sacred animals, sky ancestors or invisible spirits, allowed us to form larger, more complex groups. They gave us shared identity, shared ritual and shared rules. And in doing so, they tamed something wild. Not nature, but the mind. Anthropologists call this the birth of imagined orders. Things that exist only because we agree they do. A totem, a taboo, a tribe. None can be touched, and yet they shape behavior more powerfully than fire or stone. This is what set Homo sapiens apart. Other primates can recognize a few dozen individuals, but humans, armed with shared beliefs, could unite hundreds, even thousands. Not through force, but through story. Through shared myths, humans became something new. We formed rituals, structured, symbolic performances that reinforced belief. We sang the songs of our ancestors. We danced the hunts of our heroes. We offered gifts to spirits we could not see, but dared not ignore. This was not madness. It was memory, organized, and it held us together. Soon belief became law. The rules were no longer just preferences. They were sacred. To break them was not just dangerous, it was unthinkable. And so fiction gave birth to morality, to justice, to power. We began to invest these fictions into objects, carved wood, colored beads, pieces of bone, not because they were useful, but because they were meaningful, and in that meaning they became real. As humans spread across the continents, their stories came with them. Some grew into religions, some remained clan traditions, some were lost forever, buried beneath time and sand. But all had one thing in common: they told us how to live, and why. Children learned these stories before they could hunt, before they could speak in full sentences. They didn't memorize laws, they played them, they became them. In doing so, each generation passed on not just skills, but worldviews. Today we may no longer bow to the river gods or the wind spirits, but we still live by fiction. We believe in nations, imaginary lines on a map, in currency, paper with shared trust, in corporations, legal ghosts that own buildings and ideas. None of these exist in the natural world, and yet they shape every moment of our lives. We have domesticated the world, but first, we domesticated the mind. We taught it to believe, to obey, to dream, and those dreams built pyramids, launched wars, wrote constitutions, gave rise to civilization itself. In the end, it wasn't just tools or fire that made us human. It was the stories we told, the invisible bonds we believed in, the truths we imagined together. From the flicker of firelight to the glow of city skylines, it was fiction that gave us form. And the mind, once wild, now tethered to symbols, became the architect of civilization.